Today's reading is from Rays of the One Light, Weekly Commentaries on the Bible and Bhagavad Gita by Swami Kriyananda. Why devotees fall? Truth is one and eternal. Realize oneness with it in your deathless self within. The following commentary is based on the teachings of Paramhansa Yogananda. An endlessly fascinating question is, why did Judas fall after receiving the extraordinary blessing of being accepted into the inner circle of Jesus Christ's disciples? For Judas was one of the 12 apostles, yet he betrayed Jesus and earned himself the opprobrium of all Christendom for all futurity for his sin. We find Judas reprimanding Jesus just days before that betrayal. Jesus, aware that his disciples would soon be facing with his death, the supreme tragedy of their lives, allowed Mary to express her devotion by anointing his feet with costly ointment. This act of wanton waste, as Judas saw it, awakened indignation in that disciple. Why was not this ointment sold for 300 pence and given to the poor? This he said, not that he cared for the poor, but because he was a thief and kept the purse and bare what was put therein. Then Jesus said, Let her alone. Against the day of my bearing hath she kept this. For the poor always ye have with you, but me ye have not always. Doubt the power of delusion, respect it, indeed, fear it, though not in the sense of cowering before it. For as Yogananda said, one is not safe until he attains nirvikalpa samadhi, the final state of union with God. Judas, through attachment to money, opened his consciousness to subtle influences, which may be called satanic, that drew his thoughts toward other related attitudes. The importance of worldly power, for instance, and of worldly influence. The Bhagavad Gita gives a graphic explanation of how easily the mind can be drawn downward once it begins to feed on wrong attitudes. In the second chapter, Sri Krishna states, If one ponders on sense objects, there springs up attraction to them. From attraction grows desire. Desire, impatient for fulfillment, flames into anger. From anger, there rises infatuation, the delusion that object alone is worth, clinging to the exclusion of all others. From infatuation ensues forgetfulness of the higher self. From forgetfulness of the self follows degeneration of the discriminative faculty, and when discrimination is lost, there follows the annihilation of one's spiritual life. At the first thought of delusion, Paramhansa Yogananda said, that is the time to stop it. Thus, through Holy Scripture, God has spoken to mankind. Om, Om, Om.
Well, good morning, everyone. Let's talk about delusion, huh? You know, Yogananda would sometimes say something I think we can all find reassuring. He said, God doesn't mind our faults. He minds our indifference, meaning he notices our indifference to him. You know, when we think about, as our culture and world learns more about, the world in which we inhabit, our planet, our cosmos, and all of that sort of thing. We see it getting vaster and vaster, whether in the micro or the macro, and we begin to feel pretty insignificant in this world. But there's always good news, a silver lining in every cloud, because we also have to admit something that Yogananda would talk about also, which is that we didn't make this world. He said, I sometimes argue with Divine Mother, why do you impose upon us this delusion, this ignorance, this sense of our separateness from you, our sense of loss and suffering, etc. Well, good question. But as Kriyananda, our founder, once put it, most people wouldn't have it any other way. We seek these things for themselves, but we can't escape the fact that we didn't create it. You know, sometimes in the New Age and New Thought, people speak in terms of, I chose my parents, I chose this life, and those are all nice things to say. The purpose of that is to help us to take ownership of our life circumstances, and well, we ought. But the fact is, I don't remember choosing my parents. I don't remember choosing any of this stuff I'm stuck with, good, bad, or indifferent, as a matter of fact. I take ownership, but as to the cause and so forth, the source, I don't see that. I think it's helpful. In fact, Yogananda put it that way. He said, you know, give God your faults. He likes that. Doesn't mean we necessarily blame God for our problems, although maybe it's a good start sometimes. But nonetheless, the real essence of how we can achieve what we want, which is happiness, is to step back from it and not identify with it. Many of us, a number of us, are studying the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali right now for an 8-week course, and even I admit it's kind of heady, kind of thick, dense, and mental. But you know, deep in the bowels of Patanjali's clinical analysis of life, which he not a lot of devotion in the Yoga Sutras, okay? It's not a lot of feeling. But like Sri Yukteswar, who wrote, Yogananda's guru, who wrote the Holy Science and declared at the end that love is the answer, so to speak, not having said anything else about it, not conveying any sense of divine love whatsoever in the book, still, even in Patanjali, there is this deeper sense. It's kind of a purity. Call it a mental purity, if you will. So anyway, we've been talking about how the essential path of awakening is to dissolve, you might say, the responses to our environment, our circumstances, our flaws, our faults, and to rest in the spirit within. But that sounds very clinical. That sounds very mental. And even though the dissolution of the mental reactive processes through meditation and so forth seems like a mental process, there's pure feeling as well. If you were to sit still, and you all have, when you sit still and actually are able to calm your thoughts, even though for some people, in the midst of that, it feels like empty, it might feel as if nothing. There comes up sort of like water rising out of a well or something. There rises this little bubble of happiness, this little bubble of joy. And just as we can purify and cleanse and dissolve and clean and eliminate all of our thoughts to look into the mirror of our own consciousness and be still and know, so also we can clear, dissolve, clean, and refine our feelings towards ourselves, towards other people. And so the process really is one and the same, because in the end, there is no difference between being self-aware and feeling. They are inextricably linked. Their separation, in fact, begins our problems, our dissolution. Introspection is the affirmation today. And introspection can be applied both to our feelings and to our thoughts. And though Patanjali seems to make it seem as if to our thoughts and mental images that come to us, in fact, as those of you who have studied know, he uses the term citta, which is far more associated with our feelings in that. And so when we think of this world, it's imposed on us, okay? There are two kinds of karma, essentially. One is I'll call it environmental karma. I'm born in a body, it might be healthy, it might not be healthy, I might be male, I might be female, I might be Indian, I might be American. All these things are imposed. I have to eat, and so forth. I have to struggle and get educated and find a job and pay my bills, and all this stuff is imposed upon us, okay? And that we really can't help. But then there's the stuff we, sort of bring in with us, right? As children, you might say, all of our predilections and opinions and so forth, and likes and dislikes. And so we have two aspects of it. Well, if you really think about it that way, it's overwhelming. How do we get out? Well, the only way out is in, as somebody once put on a bumper sticker. The only way out is to refine and still who we are. We've been blessed to have several visitors, as many of you know, from India, bringing with them the vibration of that sacred land and so on. There's something that simply can't be conveyed by the intellect, something that you feel in the stillness. There is this sort of skylight, as Kriyananda once put it when he had the inspiration to write the essence of the Bhagavad Gita, his greatest spiritual work. And this skylight is essentially to look beyond ourselves. Yogananda said that, and this always puzzled me, I'm not much into mathematics per se, but he said our freedom, our happiness is achieved by only 25%, the solution is only 25% of our effort. The rest of it's God's grace, and half of that, or part of that's through the Guru's grace, representing God. And so, but what I realized about that is, what he's saying is that 25% of our problems are only 25% of the problem. We didn't make the whole thing. So think of it this way. This world in which we find ourselves, being bigger than ourselves, our part in the solution towards happiness is only a relatively small part of it. And that can help free us from the burden that we have about our issues. Many people, like St. Augustine, say, make me good, but not yet. But nonetheless, you don't have to look very far to see in the world around us all the difficulties and so forth. And even if you might be happy today, you might not be happy tomorrow. And so I wrote a blog recently called Happiness, the New God. And, we've had this battle between science and religion. But there's a solution, because it's that feeling at the center of ourselves. It's that self-satisfaction, that contentment or lack thereof, that insecurity or security. It's that self-acceptance or non-acceptance. Really, no matter what the world is out there that we didn't create, the world we create is in here. And whereas in the past, we've had all this, religious stuff about, as soon as you talk about God, you've objectified God. And God, therefore, is other. God, therefore, is in some container, some place, and has a form, and has a name, and then all these ideas come along with it. But when Yogananda was inspired as a young monk, he went off to Japan, and it was on that trip to Japan that he had the inspiration that guided his entire life's work. And it was based on an ancient teaching. Truth is always the same. It never really changes. But he encapsulated in the one word made well known in the Indian teachings tradition, Satchidanandam. That God, instead of being a person or, on some place, is joy, is bliss, is ever conscious, ever present, immortal, and within ourselves, ever new. And it, you might say, brings it down to the here and now. And this seed thought that we're all seeking happiness, that we're all wanting to avoid unhappiness, is a gift to our culture, a gift to our planet, because it removes from the debate of science and religion, it removes from the debate of theology all the concepts. And in fact, what we're seeing in studies today is more and more people are interested in what makes people happy. Because that's what it comes down to. technology may be fun, but it doesn't make us happy. And thus we have this science of happiness. He called it the science of religion. Now, it's a little old-fashioned now, but it's really the science of mind, the science of consciousness, the science of happiness. It's the science of what we want and how do we get it. And this practical application of these principles is something that we desperately need. My daughter has taken up writing blogs following her father. I had nothing to do with that. She just started, but her latest one was entitled Anguishing Monotony. And those of you, which is most of you, who have read the autobiography know that he states in the autobiography that when the soul awakens to the anguishing monotony, that's his term, of repeated rounds of birth, life, birth, death, and so forth. For me, it means coming back as a teenager. Then the soul screams in rebellion or cries out in rebellion, I want out. And so she read a book that was inspiring, she said. It was held out to be a book of hope and promise, and about some people in World War II who struggled against the horrors of the war and achieved something or other. She didn't say what they achieved, but anyway, they overcame their challenges. But then she asked the question, well, that's wonderful, but is it enough? And she says, for me, it's not enough. Because we all have, the challenges may change their name and form, but what you got over yesterday, well, what's on your plate today? What's on your plate tomorrow? It's never going to end. In fact, Yogananda, when asked, well, where does it all end? He said it ends in endlessness. Now, most of us, we just want a day off. It's sunny today, right? We want to sit by the river and, fish for inspiration. Did I say that right? Okay. We want to rest, and that's what happens during life. We want comfort, and so forth. Well, I have bad news for you. One day he was complaining to Divine Mother, Yogananda, was complaining to Divine Mother, every time I finish a project, you give me another project. And she responded to him, I'm in bliss, and I'm running the entire universe. Can't you do a small part of it? Needless to say, he changed the subject. And that's not really a very comforting thought. But consider this, be a little mental with me if you will. If our soul's destiny is to merge into spirit, into God, I don't know what God is, but besides bliss, God's probably infinite, right? We could probably agree on that. Well, is there anything left out of being infinite? Is there anything like not happening in infinity? If you become infinite, you're pretty busy bunny, I'd say. You're involved with everything. And so this idea, the idea that we're going to rest is simply the opposite of being active. It's no solution at all. Padma mentioned last week, I think it was Padma, who talked about Swami Kriyananda, and he pretty much worked endless hours, even to his dying day, and we know that Yogananda too kept secretaries busy 24/7 around the clock. I'm not saying we should aspire to do that necessarily for its own sake, but when we grow in consciousness, we expand. And Kriyananda in his book Awaken to Superconsciousness says, don't seek rest as the process of doing, seek rest at the center of what you're doing. Because it's at the center of ourselves that this Sat Chidanandam, this not rest in the physical, mental, human way exists, but the rest which brings us refreshment. Think of creativity. Think of you think of these old conductors, they live to really a ripe old age, or think of Einstein, or a great artist, or a great saint. As our consciousness expands, we're in bliss, we're in joy, at least in our creative activities and so forth. We need to reformulate what we think is our goal and find it where it really truly exists. Otherwise, we're panting all the time. We're stressed all the time. We're seeking something outside ourselves all the time. Even in our devotion, which is certainly better than 99.9% of the rest of the stuff we think about and do during the day, we're still reaching out somewhere. And so Patanjali isn't wrong. It is the cessation of that mental and emotional activity, but it doesn't bring us to nothing. It brings us to everything. And if, therefore, resting in our center, if we will, unmindful of our likes and dislikes, unmindful of our stress, our problems, whether we like that person, whether they like us, and so forth, that's the rest we seek. And that's the respite we seek from what is otherwise the anguishing monotony of our good days, our bad days, our friends, or the people we don't like. It'll never end. Never end. But the truth is it will never end. But we want to be happy. Do you see the difference? And so this teaching, if you will, this practice of yogas, citta, vritti, nirod, raises us, expands us to become all that we can become. Too much, too often, too many people see religion, spirituality, the practice of yoga, the practice of meditation, doing good deeds, being virtuous. All these things they're fine, but they're not where it goes. Being a good bunny is great. Better than being a bad bunny. Bad bunnies get like this. They get friars. But what we want is to rest in the self, live in the self. Gita's anguishing monotony, she came to that conclusion in herself. She said, all these wonderful qualities of people, which we admire, and we should, because they're a stepping stone, but they are not really where we're going. And this is how we can eliminate the process by which, we might like people who are good in business or good artists, or they're nice people. Nice, I just love that word, nice people. But that means somebody else isn't. And so we can never end that process, that reactive process. We can never find the self-acceptance, the happiness of our heart. Happiness is the issue, not human happiness, but perpetual happiness. This is a great gift. It's not new, and yet I think if you search the annals of spirituality, except in modern times, I don't think you'll find it anywhere. I don't think you'll find it in the Vedas or the Upanishads or the Bible. You have to dig. It's there, but you see, we've come to a time when it's so overwhelming, everything around us, that we're saying, neti, neti, not this, not that. We're stripping the universe. In our culture, we're stripping the universe of all form because we realize it is all about me. We just haven't really discovered who the me is yet. But this is the pattern of the evolution of consciousness. And at first, pursuit of happiness, life, liberty, it's been rather selfish, culturally speaking, rather exploitative, rather greedy, unsustainable. But it's gradually moving towards something that's sustainable. And this is a great gift. So our message, if you will, today is it's not really that important how much of a schmuck we are. You can be sure you're a schmuck. Okay, I'm a schmuck. You can be sure we have faults. We can't help that. But that's not the solution, is to weed them all out one by one. The solution is basically to be still, to know, to introspect as the affirmation, and then from that quietness of mind, that self-acceptance, that peace of the heart, then act as you must. Because that state of being is our God. God, happiness, is the new God. From that quiet bubble of joy and so forth, we know how to smile. We know how to act. This is the greatest gift. And essentially, Though you have to dig for it, and I'll end with it, as Jesus said, the kingdom of heaven is within us. And Jesus was a great yogi, but there were very few people with ears to hear and eyes to see that. But we have that now. So let's take a moment and be still and know.